The first time Thomas Caffrey saw him, Samuel Kincaid was just another shadow among the rows of cotton, silent, obedient, and invisible to the world that thought it owned him. But there was something about that silence, a deliberate, measured patience that didn't belong to a man accustomed to chains. In the scorching summer of 1850, in eastern Texas, 7 men across 3 counties would die within months, each one the purchaser of this same man. And yet, no weapon, no mark, no sign of rebellion betrayed what was coming. Only the ledger's cold phrase, "Sudden failure of Constitution." That was the official story. What really happened was far darker. Samuel moved through each plantation like a shadow that observed everything, calculating every rhythm, every weakness. The overseers didn't notice him. They couldn't see the mind that mapped their patterns, anticipated their movements, and learned the secret vulnerabilities that money, power, and violence could not protect. He was the ghost in the machine of slavery, a system designed to control, dominate, and erase, yet utterly incapable of containing him. Caffrey, like the others before him, believed in order. He believed in predictable human behavior. A practical man, he measured everything in dollars, hours, and obedience. He would never suspect that the very human he purchased was quietly turning that precision back on him. Samuel asked questions, subtle ones, the sort that left no trace. He memorized who carried grudges, who was in debt, who was sick, who was alone. And then he waited. By the time Caffrey's headache claimed him, Samuel had already cataloged every movement, every dosage of medicine, every vulnerable moment of his owner's day. There was no fight, no struggle, only the quiet, inevitable collapse of a man who thought he could own what was never his to command. Caffrey's daughter would later describe him as having died in his sleep, but the truth, buried beneath polite euphemisms and the judgment of 1850 physicians, was far more precise, far more deliberate. Samuel's actions were a lesson the plantations could never learn, a reminder that power is only an illusion until tested. And yet, the ledger buried the evidence. The town whispered the rumor, and life carried on as if nothing had happened. But what happens when a single man turns the rules of the system against its masters, moving from estate to estate, leaving widows behind and no one to answer for the deaths? This is where most men would stop, unable to comprehend the patience, the planning, the cold inevitability of what Samuel became. But if you are still listening, lean in, because what comes next will take you deeper, beyond fear, into a truth that was never meant to be spoken aloud. A man who could not be owned, and whose very presence was death to those who tried. And as we descend further, I want you to prepare yourself. The story of Samuel Kincaid is not just history. It is a blueprint for understanding the invisible forces that govern obedience, power, and the unassailable mind. After Caffrey's death, Samuel returned to the auction block like a phantom no ledger could hold accountable. Robert Chandler, a man of ambition and discipline, paid little attention to the whispers that followed Samuel's name. Chandler believed in order, in rational systems, in predictable outcomes. He believed a man could be bought, owned, and measured like the cotton he harvested. Samuel knew otherwise. From the moment he arrived at Chandler's plantation, Samuel began the quiet work of observation. Every corridor, every field, every porch and granary became part of his mental map. He noted Chandler's routines, the way he inspected the quarters every Sunday, how he handled his ledgers, how he responded to illness, how he trusted his household and his overseers. Samuel did not hurry. There was no rush. Patience was his instrument, invisibility his shield. The enslaved community noticed the difference immediately. Samuel asked questions not to challenge authority but to learn the intricate web of vulnerabilities that surrounded it. He listened to the quiet conversations, watched the hidden gestures, absorbed the secrets no one intended to share. The system that claimed to control life, death, and labor could not foresee that its own predictability would be turned against it. Chandler's stomach ailment became a ticking clock in Samuel's calculated design. He observed the routine administration of calomel, the timing, the dosages, the way Chandler trusted his wife to mix it exactly as the doctor prescribed. He memorized every subtle clue, the sounds of footsteps in the hall, the patterns of when doors were left unlocked, the precise rhythm of Chandler's heartbeat in moments of rest. And then, with no warning, the inevitable occurred. Chandler slumped over his ledger, eyes fixed, color drained, his body a vessel emptied of vitality. Again, no weapon, no struggle, just the silent orchestration of death executed with exacting precision. Dr. Whitfield, summoned to the scene, documented what appeared to be natural causes: organ failure, chronic digestive disorders, the random cruelty of biology. But Samuel knew the truth, and in the shadows of that truth, the enslaved whispered it quietly, like a prayer or a warning. The man cannot be owned. By the time Samuel left Chandler's estate, the town began to sense a pattern. The authorities were powerless, the ledgers impotent, the law blind to what a mind, honed in observation and strategy, could accomplish. Samuel moved through the cotton fields and grand homes like a shadow of inevitability, teaching the enslaved communities a lesson no master ever would: that the illusion of control is fragile, and the unbroken mind is the most dangerous weapon of all. Halfway through this story, take a moment. Comment below with the phrase, "The shadow moves twice." Not because it's a secret, but because repetition binds awareness. It marks the moment when the observer becomes participant, when the mind recognizes the invisible forces that govern obedience, fear, and survival. And now, brace yourself, because what comes next is where Samuel's method becomes fully terrifying. When observation transforms into a relentless, unstoppable force, and the line between myth and history blurs in the record books no one dares read aloud. Samuel's reputation was still whispered when he arrived at the next plantation. Yet no paper, no court record, no law could hold him accountable. To the new owner, he was just another field hand, another piece of property to be measured, catalogued, and ordered. But Samuel understood the invisible architecture of power in a way no man in Texas could conceive. He moved like a predator among prey who believed themselves hunters. Every glance, every gesture, every routine was data. Every weak link in the chain of authority was memorized, analyzed, and stored. This plantation was larger than Chandler's, stretching across 900 acres with a network of overseers and enslaved laborers whose lives were divided into schedules, punishments, and rewards. The owner prided himself on control, believing discipline could bend any man. Samuel watched. He didn't resist. He didn't provoke. Instead, he learned the unspoken codes, the times when the overseers were distracted, the silences in the quarters, the moments of complacency when the owner's ego replaced vigilance. He observed patterns of disease, diet, and dependency, the subtle ways the human body can betray itself. Men and women on the plantation were ill-treated, underfed, stressed beyond endurance. Yet Samuel noticed what no one else did: the threshold between life and the fragile spark that could be extinguished. He saw the master's routines not as security, but as opportunity. He saw every relationship, every loyalty, every obedience as a variable in an equation that only he could solve. When the next death came, it was as quiet, precise, and untraceable as the last. The owner's heart failed, or so it was written in the ledgers. The doctor, called in from the county seat, repeated the same words, the same phrases, the same impotent diagnoses: sudden failure of constitution. Yet the enslaved workers, the silent witnesses, understood something the white community could not. This was intentional. This was intelligence applied with lethal precision. Samuel was no mere man. He was a force moving through the machinery of slavery, dismantling it from within without ever breaking its visible structure. And it was not vengeance alone that drove him. It was a lesson, subtle yet unforgettable, to every man who believed power could be bought with coin, that control over another life was an illusion. Every estate he entered, every ledger he passed through, every widow left behind became a testament to a truth too dangerous to be spoken. Obedience is never guaranteed. Authority is never absolute. and the mind of the unbroken can never be captured. By now, the whispers had spread beyond plantation quarters. Hidden networks of enslaved people passed stories along, like coded messages, acknowledging that one man had turned fear and invisibility into mastery. This was more than survival, it was strategic annihilation wrapped in civility, a dark intelligence that thrived in plain sight. Samuel had become a ghost in the system, teaching that knowledge is power, patience is weaponized, and death is sometimes the only teacher capable of revealing the true price of domination. By the time Samuel reached his fourth owner, the pattern had become almost ritualistic, yet no one in power noticed. To the world, he remained property, yet in reality he was the orchestrator of events no ledger, no courthouse, no law could account for. Each man who purchased him believed control was a birthright, a contract secured with currency, contracts, and signatures. Samuel knew better. Control is not granted, it is observed, understood, and exploited. This plantation was one of the most structured in eastern Texas. Its owner prided himself on order, bureaucracy, and rigid schedules. He had studied the failures of others, convinced that discipline was the armor against chaos. He was wrong. Samuel moved through the estate with deliberate subtlety, every step cataloging weaknesses, every conversation a data point in the blueprint of inevitable collapse. He watched the routines of servants, the timing of medicine, the cadence of meals, the exact moment when the owner retired to his study. Every detail became a vector in a web only Samuel could see. The enslaved noticed his attentiveness, the way he listened without seeming to, the way he asked questions that revealed nothing but gathered everything. They began to speak to each other in hushed tones, passing knowledge like fire from one hand to the next. "He cannot be owned," they whispered. That simple truth carried more weight than all the overseer's rules combined. For Samuel, these networks were more than observation, they were reinforcement. The invisible lines connecting human awareness, secrecy, and survival were the conduits of his power. And then it happened again. The owner, meticulous and proud, was found dead in his study, body still, expression neutral, the work of medicine and chronic illness cited as cause. Dr. Whitfield wrote "Failure of Constitution," as he always did, oblivious to the precision with which Samuel had moved through the estate's ecosystem. No sign of struggle, no weapon, no outward defiance, just a man who had used knowledge, patience, and observation to bend reality around him. This was more than vengeance, it was a demonstration of control that transcended brute force. Samuel's method was elegant in its terror. Every estate, every ledger, every widow left behind was a statement. Systems built on human subjugation contain within themselves the seeds of their undoing. Power can be bought, but it cannot be imposed on the mind that refuses to surrender. And now, as we descend even further, listen closely. The forces Samuel exploited are not gone, they exist in every hierarchy, every institution, every unchallenged system around you today. To recognize them is to awaken. To ignore them is to remain a pawn. If you are still with me, comment "The shadow moves" twice again, because recognition is the first step toward mastery, and awareness is the weapon no ledger can erase. By the fifth plantation, Samuel's presence carried weight, even in silence. He was no longer just a man purchased, he was a phenomenon whispered about in quarters, a shadow whose reputation moved faster than the wagons that carried cotton to market. But among the white masters, he remained invisible, just another field hand, unremarkable, obedient. This is the brilliance of his method. Invisibility was his armor, patience his weapon, and knowledge his untraceable ammunition. Samuel spent weeks, even months, mapping everything. The rhythms of authority, the weak links in discipline, the subtleties of medicine, and the predictable nature of men blinded by their own arrogance. He understood one fundamental truth. No system survives the precise observation of a mind that is free while others believe it constrained. Every routine became a vector of vulnerability, every act of trust a silent invitation. He was learning how to wield death not as chaos, but as inevitability. At night, he moved quietly through the quarters, listening to conversations that revealed more than any ledger, more than any overseer's report. He studied the relationships between the enslaved and their masters, noticing who carried grudges, who had debts, who harbored secret fears. All of it was data. All of it was preparation. The white owners could only see compliance. Samuel saw everything. And then, as always, it happened. Another man, confident in his purchase, met his end quietly, without struggle, without sign of foul play. "Failure of constitution," wrote the doctor. The ledger recorded the death with cold efficiency. But Samuel's method left nothing to chance. He had orchestrated a collapse that looked like fate, disease, or divine will, but in reality, it was intelligence applied with lethal precision. The plantation system, designed to dominate human life, had been bested not by force, but by patience and understanding. This is the moment most men cannot comprehend. True power is invisible. It does not strike with violence. It strikes with inevitability. Samuel's victims were not aware of the danger because they believed themselves masters of all variables. And yet, the unbroken mind sees variables they cannot, exploits patterns they ignore, and moves through systems like a ghost that cannot be stopped. As you watch and listen, understand this: what Samuel did in Texas in 1850 is not just history. It is a lesson in the mechanics of control, observation, and the illusion of power. He teaches that obedience is never guaranteed, authority is fragile, and knowledge applied with patience can become unstoppable. This descent is not only a story of death, it is a mirror. Look closely. Recognize the invisible forces shaping your own world. And remember, those who cannot be owned will always outlast those who believe in ownership. By the sixth plantation, Samuel had become more than a man. He was a force no ledger could contain, no law could constrain. The whispers in the quarters had grown into something approaching legend. Enslaved people spoke of him in reverent tones, calling him a shadow, a ghost, a spirit who could not be owned. Yet to the white masters he remained invisible, unremarkable, obedient. That invisibility was not a flaw, it was a weapon, honed with patience and precision that no man could anticipate. Samuel studied everything with methodical intensity: the cadence of footfalls in the halls, the patterns of when doors were unlocked, the exact timing of meals and medicine. He observed the subtle weaknesses in his owner's body, mind, and ego. Every ritual of power that the master relied upon became a map of vulnerability. And every relationship, overseer to master, slave to overseer, family to servant, was catalogued, analyzed, and understood. What Samuel was building was not revenge, it was inevitability. He was constructing a system within a system, a hidden architecture of control where the laws of physics and physiology became instruments of precision. Each death he orchestrated appeared natural, random, unavoidable, yet behind the facade was intelligence, calculation, and observation so precise it bordered on the surgical. He moved through the plantation as if time itself bent around him, leaving no evidence but an inescapable pattern that only those willing to see could recognize. By now, the townsfolk had begun to sense something beyond comprehension. Whispers traveled faster than any messenger. A man who could not be owned, whose presence meant death to those who believed themselves masters. But the system, so rigid and confident in its dominance, could not adapt to the invisible. No court, no ledger, no physician could comprehend what intelligence applied with perfect patience could achieve. And in that silence, a lesson emerges: a dangerous, intoxicating truth. True power does not announce itself. True power does not fight. It observes, it calculates, it waits, and then it acts with precision so clean it appears divine or fated. Samuel was teaching that lesson, and the world around him, masters, overseers, merchants, were too blind, too arrogant, too trapped in their assumptions to understand what had already taken root. If you are following this descent, Pause and take note. There is a hidden structure to control, obedience, and authority in every world. And now, as halfway turns into deeper insight, comment the shadow moves twice because recognition is the first step in awakening, and awareness is the weapon that transforms the observer into the master of their own fate. The next step is where history becomes legend, and the true mastery of Samuel Kincaid, the precision, patience, and unstoppable inevitability reaches its apex. By the seventh plantation, Samuel had become a legend whispered in fear and awe, even among the enslaved, who understood the magnitude of what they were witnessing. He had moved through 6 estates, leaving widows, shattered ledgers, and a pattern that defied all comprehension. Yet, in the eyes of the white masters, he was still just a man, a field hand, obedient, compliant. That was the brilliance of his strategy. The mind cannot be measured, controlled, or purchased, and to those who believed in ownership, Samuel's existence was invisible until it was lethal. He studied this final estate with the same deliberate patience that had made him unstoppable. The owner believed in rigid routines, in schedules and punishments, in the illusion that discipline could bend the human mind. Samuel observed every pattern, every predictable act, every habit and vulnerability. He noted the timing of meals, the administration of medicines, the cadence of authority that flowed like a river through the plantation. Every relationship, every microgesture, every trusted servant became part of the calculus. No one saw what was happening. Samuel's questions, his attentiveness, his quiet obedience, all were camouflage. But beneath the surface, a mind had taken full account of every possible variable. He understood fear, dependence, and the fragile anatomy of control. And he had learned something even more dangerous. The system itself carried the seeds of its undoing. Authority relies on assumptions, on obedience, on ignorance. Samuel exploited all three, and then it happened again. Another sudden death, another ledger entry, failure of constitution. The town doctor, called in from the county seat, noted chronic ailments, natural causes, and the inevitability of human frailty. The world believed it had explained what it could not comprehend. But those who had eyes to see, those who whispered in the quarters, who told each other the truth in coded language, knew the reality. Samuel had become something beyond human. A shadow in the system, a ghost who bent mortality to his understanding, a force of knowledge applied with precision. This was more than revenge. It was a demonstration, a blueprint for understanding how the unbroken mind operates in a world designed to dominate and suppress. Power is fragile. Systems fail when observation meets patience. Authority collapses when the invisible cannot be controlled. Samuel's journey through 7 estates was a lesson in inevitability, in intelligence weaponized against arrogance, in the terrifying elegance of a mind free when all others were trapped. And now the story is almost complete. The final section will reveal not only the consequences for Samuel and the world around him, but also the hidden, systemic truths. He exposed truths about power, control, and the dangerous knowledge that changes everything once you see it. By the time Samuel Kincaid moved on from that 7th estate, he had transformed from man into legend, from laborer into force. The plantations he passed through bore no scars of violence. Yet their owners lay in coffins, their ledgers empty of life but full of unanswered questions. He had proven something the world refused to admit. Power cannot be bought. Authority is an illusion, and the human mind, when unbroken and observant, can move through systems of control like water through stone, soft, invisible, inevitable. The widows left behind, the silent enslaved witnesses, and the whispers that traveled faster than any courier carried the proof. Samuel was not merely surviving. He was teaching. Every estate, every pattern, every calculated death was a lesson carved into history that no textbook would dare preserve. The plantation system had prided itself on order, predictability, and obedience. Samuel exposed its fatal flaw. It assumed minds could be owned. And when those minds refused, it failed in ways both subtle and devastating. He vanished from public record after his seventh estate, leaving behind a chain of chaos carefully disguised as natural fate. Some say he escaped to Louisiana, others that he assumed a new identity and blended into free black communities, a ghost among people who understood power without owning it. But the truth is less important than the principle he embodied. That knowledge applied with patience, observation, and intelligence can dismantle any system designed to dominate life. What makes Samuel's story truly dangerous is not just the deaths he orchestrated, it is the understanding he leaves behind for those willing to see. Look closely at your world. Observe the invisible hierarchies, the patterns of control, the illusions of authority, the subtle dependencies that govern behavior. The systems built to dominate cannot withstand the unbroken mind. And once you recognize this, once you internalize it, your perception of power, obedience, and freedom will never be the same. Samuel Kincaid was more than a man who killed his owners. He was a master of the invisible, a strategist in a world that prized domination, a mind that weaponized patience, observation, and inevitability. His story is a warning, a blueprint, and an awakening. If you followed this descent, understand that these forces exist everywhere in corporations, governments, institutions, even the relationships around you. True mastery is not measured by control over others, but by clarity, awareness, and the ability to move unseen through the systems that would constrain you. And now, as you let this truth settle, carry it forward. Remember the pattern, remember the shadow, and recognize that once a man sees the machinery of control, he can no longer be owned. The world may whisper, may dismiss, may try to hide the truth, but you know it now. And that knowledge, once awakened, is unstoppable.